Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 677 for January 21st, 2018. This week I'm in Victoria, British Columbia at the 13th annual Victoria Whisky Festival, and Victoria was ground zero for whiskey news this week.
Every bar in British Columbia is carrying something from a private liquor store to stay competitive. So what? So now what? What's the next step? I mean, you can't just target one company.
Susie Seary is the operations manager for the Grand Hotel in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The hotel's bar is one of 4 partner bars for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in British Columbia. Thursday morning, agents from the province's Liquor Control and Licensing Board raided all 4 bars to seize the Society's whiskies because they were purchased through private liquor stores instead of the province's liquor distribution branch. I'll have the details, including the impact of those raids on this weekend's Victoria Whisky Festival, along with the results of this year's Canadian Whisky Awards, the calendar of events, your voice, and much more, all in this special episode of WhiskyCast from Victoria, British Columbia.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique. But a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnniewalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. Once again, agents from the British Columbia Liquor Control and Licensing Branch raided the Scotch Malt Whisky Society's 4 partner bars on Thursday, seizing what the agents claimed was illegal whiskey. Fett's Whiskey Kitchen in Vancouver lost 242 bottles valued at around $40,000 Canadian. That's around $32,000 US. While the Grand Hotel's bar in Nanaimo lost 11 bottles. There's no word on how many bottles were seized from Little Jumbo and the Union Club here in Victoria. The bars could also face fines of up to $10,000 each or have their liquor licenses suspended for 10 days, but there's no word yet on what additional penalties may be imposed. Now, here's a brief explanation. British Columbia controls liquor sales through the province's own stores, but private stores are allowed as well. They have to buy their inventory through the provincial system, but can also place special orders for whiskeys not carried in the government-owned stores, like those Scotch Malt Whisky Society whiskies. Rob and Kelly Carpenter own the Scotch Malt Whisky Society branch in Canada.
The bottles are sold in British Columbia through private liquor stores. All taxes are paid on it. Kelly and I, as the operators of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society branch in Canada, are legally registered in British Columbia as liquor agents, so everything about this in terms of how the bottles are brought in and taxes are paid and so on is absolutely legal.
Here's the thing. The province's regulations require all bars and restaurants to buy their alcoholic beverages directly from the BC Liquor Distribution Branch, and they're not allowed to buy from private liquor stores. In other words, if the buyers for BC liquor stores decide to not stock a specific whiskey in their system, that whiskey technically can't be on the menu at any bar or restaurant in the province. It should be noted that this regulation has not been widely enforced for many years. According to Susie Seary of the Grand Hotel, she was not at the hotel in Nanaimo when the agents arrived on Thursday morning, but that is a part of the story too.
What I did manage to do is I ended up going to Fett's Whiskey Kitchen to see the liquor inspectors there because I was in Vancouver. And when I walked in, I recognized the 2 gentlemen that were confiscating the bottles. And I said, "You look very familiar." And they said, "Well, that's right, you helped us. We were at your hotel a week ago asking you about Scotch Malt Whisky Society in plain clothes." And I said, well, we could have had a conversation a week ago instead of all of this happening today. And they said there was a big investigation that they were conducting and they couldn't say anything.
Why do you think they were investigating this? It's not like the Grand Hotel, Fett's, Little Jumbo, and the Union Club have been entirely secretive about selling Scotch Malt Whisky Society whiskeys.
No, it isn't. It's public. The bottles are publicly displayed with all of us. And their beef is that we are purchasing it through non-BCLDB sources. And I said, well, the place that there's only 2 locations in British Columbia where we can buy those bottles, and that's the Strathcona Liquor Store and Legacy in Vancouver. And we need to be competitive. It's a competitive market. We don't want to just all sell all the colors of Johnnie Walker and that's it. We need to figure out what are we going to do to attract customers into our bars. And so we purchased through the Strathcona, thinking that because the Strath is buying directly through the BCLDB, it's technically doesn't look like there's an issue there. So then we purchased them through them. The Fett's Whiskey Kitchen's been buying them for 6 years, and we've just become a partner bar in the last year, and no one's ever said anything to any of us. So that's how we proceeded, and we paid the taxes to the Strath. And then on top of it, we have our markups, and then we charge the tax back to the... So effectively, it felt like they were getting more than enough of the taxes on that, plus our business licenses. And our purchases that we all buy our liquor through are... depending on what your total sales of, or your purchases of liquor are over the year, is how much they rank your business license and how much you have to pay in fees to the government.
Fett's owners Eric and Allura Fergie declined our request for an interview on the advice of their attorney, and the owners of Little Jumbo have not responded to our requests for an interview. As for the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch, which is part of the province's Ministry of the Attorney General, their spokesman declined to be interviewed, but did provide a statement by email in which they outlined the requirement that bars and restaurants have to buy directly from the Liquor Distribution Branch. They also cited the agency's policy of not commenting directly on any enforcement actions, and also made it clear that the Liquor Control Branch operates independently from the Attorney General, who has no say on enforcement actions. What happens next? Well, Rob and Kelly Carpenter have retained a lawyer to try and fight the seizures, which, as we've mentioned, specifically targeted only Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottlings with no explanation.
We honestly don't know at this point. It could have just been that someone in the licensing branch feels a point needs to be made about something, and we're a very easy target because they're all green bottles that are very easy to identify and seize and so on. And we're just a tiny agency. We sell less than 350 bottles in British Columbia a year. So we're tiny in comparison with the overall business in BC, and we just may have been seen as a bit of an easy target.
As you might expect, when news of the raids hit here at the Hotel Grand Pacific, just as the Victoria Whisky Festival was getting underway, it became the key topic of the weekend. The Society was scheduled to present a grand tasting for around 80 people on Friday night and 2 master classes on Saturday. They all had to be canceled, with ticket holders receiving a full refund. All of the festival's profits each year go to 2 local charities, and the Carpenters have pledged to make up any shortfall to the charities from the cancellations of those tastings. In addition, the Society's table at Saturday night's main consumer tasting was empty, and a number of other exhibitors had to change their plans out of fear that liquor inspectors might show up during the festival to look for other bottles not sold in the BC liquor stores. Jonathan Bray of Calgary-based importer Secret Spirits decided to support the Society with a protest against what he calls British Columbia's antiquated liquor laws.
Most of our purchases are from consumers in BC buying from retailers in Alberta. A, it's available. B, it's far less expensive. And it's just across the border. So that's really where most of our sales flow from.
Albeit illegal, right?
Well, supposedly, but actually at a federal level, there is no law that says that you can't buy alcohol from any other province in Canada. It's only the provincial governments that want to prop up their overblown expensive monopolies so that they can continue to charge ridiculous prices. So, for example, our Scotch Whisky Advent calendar sells for $450 in Alberta. In BC, it's $990 for the same product. It's lunacy. It's crazy. If the BC LDB liquor purchaser doesn't decide that this brand should be at the government stores, it's illegal for me to pour it at the Victoria Whisky Festival.
So tell me about the protest.
Okay, so this festival I'm focusing on Oishi Japanese whiskey and Hyde Irish whiskey, both of which are registered, and there are actually purchase orders in place for the province of British Columbia, but they are not yet here, and they're not going to be supplied by the government stores. They're only going to be available for private stores, and that makes it illegal for me to showcase them at this Victoria Whisky Festival. So my table is going to have all of these glorious whiskies displayed, and the bottles are all going to be closed. So you can come and talk to them. You can touch them, feel them, look at the label, read the label, talk to me about them, but you can't drink them.
Springbank and Gordon and MacPhail also had closed bottles on their stands, with each one pouring just one whiskey during the night. Springbank's master class Saturday afternoon had to be replaced by a Lafroig class, while Gordon and MacPhail's class was canceled completely. Both had also gone to the expense of sending representatives from Scotland to the festival. Richard Urquhart was on hand for Gordon and MacPhail, but could only offer attendees a 10-year-old Ben Romack.
We're just pouring what we're allowed to pour.
It has to be disappointing. You came all the way over from Scotland for this.
Yeah, I came all the way from Scotland, but I was here for other reasons as well. I had meetings in Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and also here and in Vancouver. So yes, it's disappointing, but there's other things I can do while I'm here.
When did you first find out about the ban and that you were only going to be able to pour your 10-year-old?
Just when we arrived in Victoria, so a last-minute scramble trying to see what we had in the liquor board stores. So unfortunately, it was just one whiskey, which is all we can pour.
It's really a shame because Gordon and MacPhail has been a big supporter of this festival for years, and the family has brought some amazing whiskeys over here in the past that you could have brought them, and you can't pour them, right?
Yeah, that will be a disappointing thing. I mean, as a family and a business, we will continue to support the event as much as we can. But I think with this legislation, I know it's not new legislation, we'll just maybe not be able to take some of the older whiskies that we have taken in the past.
What could you not pour that you were going to pour tonight?
So we had the Benwood 35-year-old. So the oldest 8 years old expression from Benwood Distillery. And also we had a Strathyla 1972 as well. So just a young whiskey from there as well. So it's a shame. I spoke to a number of people who were going to come to the master class to try them, and they were obviously quite disappointed that they couldn't try the whiskies.
At least one exhibitor told me privately that he had decided to go ahead and pour everything he brought and take his chances. It should be noted that the province's liquor inspectors did not conduct any spot checks during the festival Saturday night. We'll have more on this story as it develops at whiskycast.com, and have a standing offer to the British Columbia Ministry of the Attorney General to give their side of the story. As you might expect, there were some upset people at the festival this weekend. We'll hear from a few of them coming up in a few minutes. In other news involving whiskey and government, Canada's whiskey industry is fighting against the Trudeau government's plan to raise alcohol taxes by 2% starting in April, with annual increases after that linked to the rate of inflation. The government claims excise taxes on alcohol have not been adjusted since the 1980s, but Jan Westcott of Spirits Canada says that'll lead to cascading tax hikes at all levels of government.
In Canada, just like in the United States, the very first tax that goes on all beverage alcohol that's made is the excise tax. It's a production tax. So the moment the liquid comes off the still, it's liable for excise tax. The government of Canada, in the last budget, decided that they were going to automatically increase that by inflation, the consumer price index, every year on April the 1st. Without any regard to how the market is going, without any regard to what consumers can afford, without any regard to the impact on the industry. And because it's the very first tax, all kinds of other taxes that are applied by other levels of government are built on top of that. Most of the taxes that are imposed on spirits in Canada are based on the value of the product. They're not based on the volume, they're based on the value. So when excise goes up, even by a little bit, it gets magnified as it goes through the pricing system. So in Canada, in Ontario, for example, the markup that is applied by the Liquor Board in Ontario to spirits is 139.7%. So even if it's a very small increase in excise, that gets magnified dramatically. At the very end of the price calculation is the federal sales tax, the goods and services tax, which is 5%. So you're now paying 5% on that little bit of extra excise, the markup from the liquor boards, and a few other things. By the time it gets through, what may have started off as a 3 or 4 cent increase in excise winds up being 35 cents. It never goes back to Parliament. So here you have a government instituting a tax increase every year without having to put it in front of anybody, to talk about it, to say, is it the right time? Is this time? It's hidden. And it's automatic, and we had this in the 80s, from 1981 to 1987. It damn near killed the business in Canada. We closed 11 significant distilleries. It shrunk the business. It's a disaster, and it's going to kill everybody. It applies to beer, wine, and spirits. It's the one thing that has brought the three industries together. We had a meeting shortly after this happened with the finance minister of Canada. And at one point in the meeting, I said, Minister, you've accomplished something that no other finance minister in the history of Canada has accomplished. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, you have succeeded in uniting the beer industry, the wine industry, and the spirits industry to come and talk to you with a common voice on taxes. That's how bad this is.
The other commonality between this period and that period you talked about in the 80s, the Prime Minister was named Trudeau, if I remember correctly.
That's exactly right. So we're wondering whether it's hereditary.
The industry's position is that those automatic annual tax increases will hurt future investment in the Canadian spirits industry, given the new cut in U.S. federal excise taxes. Elsewhere, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is getting some pushback now from the Scotch whisky industry over her goal of keeping the UK within the European single market after Brexit. Scotch Whisky Association executives say a post-Brexit status as a non-voting member of the trading bloc would make it difficult for British officials to protect Scotch whisky interests when the European Union negotiates free trade deals, and it could also allow Brussels to dictate whisky policy without British opposition. Right now, Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein are the only 4 non-EU members of the European single market. They have no vote on policy changes or trade deals. In other news, we have a lot of new whiskeys to talk about this week. Bowel Blair is out with 2 new single malts, the third release of its 1991 vintage, and the second release of its 2000 vintage. The 1991 was matured for 24 years in ex-bourbon barrels and a final 3 years in first-fill Spanish oak ex-sherry butts, while the 2000 vintage spent 13 years in ex-bourbon barrels and 5 years in similar Spanish oak butts. Both will be available globally. No word on pricing. Deanston is celebrating the distillery's 50th anniversary with a new limited edition bottling called Distillery. Deanston's Mike Brisbois says the whiskeys in it come from all periods of the distillery's history.
And what it is, it's 4 barrels, one being a 1977 whiskey refill, the second being a 1982 American oak, a 1996 port pipe, and a 2006 PX sherry.
Deanston Distillery is available through the distillery's online shop and at the distillery's Visitors Centre in Scotland for £110, about $153 a bottle. Balcones will be releasing its first rye whiskies in just a few weeks. The regular and cask strength versions were made with 4 different strains of rye, including one grown in North Texas. It'll go on sale at the distillery March 10th. From Australia, we have word that Sullivan's Cove is out with a 17-year-old single cask bottling from an American oak barrel. Only 200 bottles were produced, and a limited number are now available through the distillery's online shop. The price tag, $265 Australian. That's around $212 US. Of course, Bushmills has been around for a long time, but there's a new partnership between Bushmills and Belfast's Root and Branch coffee roasters. They took Brazilian coffee beans and seasoned them in used Bushmills barrels. The Bushmills Root and Branch coffee is available exclusively through reservebar.com and comes with the coffee and a bottle of Bushmills for $50. It's been a while since the Macallan has released a new edition in its fine and rare collection. That has changed with the release of the new 1977 vintage from a single sherry-seasoned hogshead cask. Only 151 bottles are available. The price tag, $15,000 each. And finally, from the rumor mill, there's word that Johnny Walker might be joined by Jane Walker in one form or another. TMZ, and yes, consider the source on this one, found a Diageo application with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to claim the rights to the brand name Jane Walker for all alcoholic beverages except for beer. Of course, Diageo has not said a word about this publicly. Just like TTB label approvals, trademark applications are considered public records. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park. And since I'm in Canada this week, that has given me the chance to reconnect with an old friend, the Highland Park 10-year-old Viking Scars edition. It was originally made just for the Canadian market, but whiskey lovers in a few other selected countries now get to enjoy it too. It's named for the Viking pioneers who left their mark on Orkney, and this Viking Scars would look great on your whiskey shelf, and even better in your glass. Find out more at highlandparkwhiskey.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Once again, I'm at the Victoria Whisky Festival in Victoria, British Columbia this weekend. I'd like to thank Festival Chairman Lawrence Graham and the entire festival committee for their hospitality this weekend, along with all of the volunteers and the staff of the Hotel Grand Pacific for making it possible. Let's open up the inbox now for this week's Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. And we'll also go back to our top story of the week, the raids by British Columbia liquor inspectors on 4 Scotch Malt Whisky Society partner bars this past Thursday. Those raids threw a lot of people into a tizzy this weekend at the Victoria Whisky Festival. Let's hear from some of them.
I really would like to know sort of the reasoning behind why they did this. I mean, I know technically what it is, but it just, why now? After 10 years of not enforcing this law, why now? I just don't get it.
What have you not been able to taste tonight that you wanted to, that you were told, I can't pour it for you?
Hey, those ones right there, the Springbank 14 and the 18, and I guess the Kilkerran. There's lots of things that have people either have been told they can't sell or pour, or just out of fear of disrupting the festival, people have just voluntarily pulled out. So it's a pain in the butt.
Well, I feel that it's targeted because it happened to happen just before the Whiskey Festival started, and it's unusually coincidental that they're only targeting Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Springbank's also a membership club, but their bottles weren't pulled. I personally feel like the BC Liquor Board is a little backwards. Coming from Alberta, I know everybody calls it the Wild West of liquor, but having this dual system in BC with the private stores and the government-run stores, it's no way to run a business, and I know a lot of businesses find it very expensive to even have liquor at their establishments because of this. The rules are very muddied, and I really think they just need to reevaluate the entire system.
What whiskeys were you not able to try tonight that you wanted to try because they couldn't pour them?
The Scotch Malt Whisky Society whiskeys. I was really looking forward to it. They were going to have stuff that was exclusive to this festival. And it was also a shame that the whiskey ambassador never got to meet the members and give a speech. And I know members really missed out on being able to meet him and hear his stories.
It's sad that the government went heavy-handed compared to talking to everybody, doing the communication that they said they would do with the general public and all the providers and all the people that are in the province, that they went heavy-handed first rather than the whole discussion.
What have you not been able to taste tonight that you wanted to because of the sudden enforcement?
The presenters here have been very generous with what they have available in the province, and I've enjoyed everything that they have had to provide us. And because I don't know what's not here that they could have provided, I'm in the blank as far as what they would provide us.
Oh, so you're not going to miss the Gordon and MacPhail 1972 Strath Isla?
Now that I know that it was supposed to be here, yes, of course I'm going to miss it. And I will look forward to next year when the government changes the rules and allows the people to enjoy what they want in British Columbia.
Let the record show that Duncan is cringing at the thought of missing that Strath Isla.
It is a witch hunt that is politically driven. It's not a tax issue because the taxes are paid, but it seems to be regulators flexing their muscles unnecessarily and causing damage. And they're using the excuse that there's some complaint that's been made. And my argument's been, who's complaining about a restaurateur or a bar owner that's doing the right thing for the public, providing what the public wants? No one's being damaged. He's not providing fentanyl. He's not providing something that's damaging the public. He's paying taxes on the product, but it's not gone through this regulatory minor opportunity portal that the government says it has to go through. It seems to be all bureaucratic driven, and it's painful.
For 8 years, on the shelves, liquor inspectors have gone in, we're fully aware of all the product, and then suddenly they come, they do this raid without any consultation, without any prior notice, without sitting down and let's talk about this, with police backup too. Like really a raid, as if they're, and in the meantime, well, we won't get into all the different pot shops that are going on and what's going on there, but
I think it's kind of interesting that they've gone after one company like SMWS and not just affected a single bar for having liquor that's legally purchased and taxes have paid twice, and now you've gone after an entire group of bars, and it seems a little suspect that they would do it on a Thursday prior to the Whiskey Festival.
And it's really sort of dampened this festival, hasn't it?
It's a different atmosphere. I've been going here for the 10 out of the 13 years, or 11 of the 13 years, and it's a different atmosphere this year. It's kind of like mom and pop are watching and you're not allowed to play in the toy chest.
Thanks to Tim Vickers, Ava Pang, Duncan Eyre, Dave Mason, Miriam Karp, and Jeremy Scott for sharing their views with us. Now, if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com. If you'd like to hear your comments on the show, just record a voice memo on your smartphone and email it to us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. And, of course, you'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. This week's Your Voice is brought to you by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. The Winter Dram's Spirits Festival is this coming Friday night, January 26th, just down the coast in Seattle, Washington. The Chicago Winter Whiskey Festival is Saturday, the 27th, along with Whiskey in the Winter 2018 at Yellow Rose Distilling in Houston, Texas. And the Buffalo Whiskey Festival is on Sunday, the 28th. Tickets are still available for the Whiskey Exchange's tasting of the 2017 Diageo special releases with Colin Dunn. That's coming up in London on January 31st. And here in the general neighborhood, the Comox Valley Whiskey Fest is the weekend of February 2nd and 3rd in Courtenay, British Columbia. Finally, if you heard last week's show on finding old whiskey bottles and other Prohibition-era memorabilia in the walls of old houses, the Bourbon Salon at Oxmoor Farm in Louisville, Kentucky will have a seminar with Mike Veach on collecting old whiskey bottles coming up February 7th. Right now, we have 213 different events on the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a whiskey event coming up that you'd like the world to know about, just use the contact form on our website and let us know about it.
You don't need a special occasion to open a bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. But when you have a special occasion, why not celebrate with a specially engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label? Here's how one whisky lover celebrated his team's recent success. He arranged to have 108 specially engraved bottles of Johnnie Walker Blue Label made for his co-workers. You might say he hit a home run. Just like a perfectly executed double play, Johnnie Walker Blue Label is smooth and well-rounded, and unlike a trophy, never needs polishing. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Johnnie Walker Blue Label Blended Scotch Whisky, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
This week's WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. While there was more drama than usual this week at the Victoria Whisky Festival, the real focus was on the whiskey, as it should be. The annual Canadian Whisky Awards ceremony has become the traditional kickoff for the festival each year, and there was a packed room for Thursday night's awards banquet here at the Hotel Grand Pacific. Corby's Hiram Walker Distillery was named Distiller of the Year, and J.P. Weiser's 35-year-old from Corby's Northern Border Collection Rare Releases series took Canadian Whisky of the Year honors. It barely beat out the field in blind judging by an 11-member panel, and for the record, I was one of the judges again this year. Dave Mitten accepted the awards for Corby Thursday night.
We are ecstatic. We're pleasantly surprised. We're humbled. There are so many amazing different Canadian whiskeys that were released this year. We were in a category with amazing brands from across the country. We weren't sure what would happen, but we are honored for this award tonight. It's been fantastic.
The final margin of victory for the Weiser's 35-year-old, just 4/100ths of a point over two runners-up. Davin DeKergamo created the awards 8 years ago to celebrate Canadian whiskey.
Extremely tight competition. Whether it was the closest or not, I can't remember from previous years. But I can tell you this, the competition was fierce this year. So whiskeys that might have won gold in other years, this year they were pushed down to silver because there were just so many other whiskeys that were so good. I don't think that the whiskeys are not as good as they were. It's just that there are so many new, really robust whiskeys that are kind of addressing consumers' tastes these days that are coming out now. So it's a big change.
And the change I noticed was that a lot of those whiskeys are coming from the big boys instead of the guys like 40 Creek who sort of innovated the flavor profile 5 to 7 years ago and sort of got everybody thinking about flavorful Canadian whiskeys again. It's the big boys that have come out with that stuff they've been sitting on that are sort of changing the pace this year.
Yeah, they really are. But I think we kind of forget two things. First of all, that the major distilleries, they are still craftspeople who really care. Every batch of whiskey is made separately and independently. They might make a lot of it, and yes, they have much larger fermenters, much larger stills, but they still are craftspeople making this whiskey, doing a really wonderful job. The other thing that Canadians always forget is that Hiram Walker is a local distillery if you live in southern Ontario, just as 40 Creek is local if you live in Toronto, Hamilton, that area. The local whiskey in Manitoba is Crown Royal. So, the big boys are doing well, but the little guys haven't been around long enough to really kind of figure out yet what they're doing. So, the big boys really won this year.
Talking about the little guys, the ones that seem to really have figured something out are the boys at True Brewers up in Whitehorse, Yukon. Not only were they Micro Distiller of the Year, but they took gold, silver, and bronze medals across their range, and they've only been selling whiskey for a year.
Yeah, they've only been selling whiskey for a year, but they've been making it for probably getting close to 10 years. And this is the secret. They waited until it was ready. I think the youngest whiskey they've released was 7 years old. A lot of the micro distillers, they really need cash, and they sell it before it's really ready to put in a bottle. And this is the problem. But these guys have a big brewery. They've got good cash flow from their beer, and so they were able to sit on it until it was ready to release, and it was ready. And you tasted it, all of it, Mark, and this is fabulous whiskey.
Any other surprises out of this year's awards? I saw a New Brunswick single malt that I hadn't heard about before.
Yeah, it's a pretty awesome whiskey too. What shocked me was the number of whiskeys like Confederation Oak that didn't win gold this year. Oh my God, the whiskey's as good as it ever has been. It's just that there are others that are, keeping up with the trend.
And I don't want to slag on 40 Creek here, but their only gold medal was for their cream liqueur, not for their flavored cream whiskey. It wasn't the Confederation Oak, the Heritage, which was the new whiskey of the year, still didn't win gold.
Yeah, their whiskeys are still fabulous.
Oh, yeah.
But other people are really, really upping their game. And let's be honest, Wiser's has a lot more depth in their warehouse than 40 Creek does. They've got a lot of whiskeys, yeah.
Where do you think we see over the next year? Where do you think we take Canadian whiskey over the next year with all this?
I think you watch the Northern Border Collection next year, you watch Crown Royal next year. They're going to be better than they were this year. Yep, that's where it's going. Bigger, bolder, and more impressive.
In fact, we got the first look Saturday here in Victoria at just what Quirby has planned for the Northern Border Collection later this year. Master blender Dr. Don Livermore presented a preview tasting of the 4 whiskeys from Wiser's, Lot 40, Gooderham and Wirtz, and Pike Creek.
How do you top it in 2018?
That was a good question. When we sat down and talked about that as a team, is that how do you top the 35-year-old? And one of the things, concepts we come up with is a blender strength style of whiskey. So in it, we do have column distilled rye and the double distilled corn whiskey, aged for 35 years. And whatever the strength ended up being, blending those ingredients together, that's what we put together. Boosting up that strength, you're certainly going to elevate your wood characteristics, and certainly what I often will call that aging flavor, which is that green apple flavor. Even though this one we tasted here today was 64.4%, we're not sure what the brand will end up as because it was one cast draws we're drawing out. I think it'll be an exceptional whiskey for the fall release of this one. I mean, it's going to have a different feel to it, different flavors to it, and then that's just manipulating what alcohol strength will do.
This year's Lot 40 cask strength is an 11-year-old, though. What happened there?
It's one of those things that it's more about selecting for flavor. That's what we wanted to do. I wanted to try find a unique lot that had a different twist, different flavor to it. Age doesn't signify quality to me in this one. The lot that we picked on this one, I actually finishes with a black licorice note, which I found was just extraordinary. I mean, I've never really seen that in a lot of our rye whiskeys, and when I've selected the bond that we were doing with this, I mean, this is the one. This is the one. Immediately when we tried it, this is the one. And I think I wanted something a little bit different than last year's release in terms of flavor profile. And this is the one we came up with, even though the age changed. But again, I'm looking at from a blender's point of view is selecting the flavors that people are curious about and the flavors.
This year's Pike Creek 21-year-old, the name may change on this one, but it's a 3 oak version.
Yeah, this one we wanted to finish the whiskeys in different types of wood and maybe even educate the consumers as to what wood and genus species of it. So we finished it in French oak, Hungarian oak, and American oak, and each of them will give different flavor textures. And we wanted to bring forward what wood brings to the equation, different spiciness, different smoky flavors. I know that Dave Broom and Davin de Kergamo were here tasting it with us. They even mentioned a tobacco note in it, which was quite unique and interesting. And I think those people are very interested in the quality of wood and the curiosity of how wood interplays with whiskey. I think this is a good demonstration of it, and I'm quite excited about that one.
And this year's Gooderham and Wirtz has another story to it. The first one was Little Trinity, named for the church that Gooderham founded in Toronto. This one is 11 Orphans.
Yeah, the Gooderham was renowned for his charity and good-naturedness, and how we picked this one was when Gooderham came over into Canada in the 1830s, when they sailed across the ocean, some families perished, and he ended up adopting 11 orphans. So the thought was, how can we coordinate that story with 11 orphans? So we were tasked with, Don, can you blend together 11 different whiskeys, get different flavors into it, and also be core to what Gooderham was, which was a Miller. So we selected different types types of grains that we've been distilling over the years. So we got a selection of just regular rye, barley, wheat, and corn, and then we put in some rye malt and some barley malt, and then we got it for the first time ever putting into an expression of whiskey is what they call as Bracetto rye, which is a very hybrid rye that has come out of Europe that we've grown selectively here in Canada, which has a little bit more of a spicy character. So it's got some Bracetto rye into it. Then we've selected some pot stills and 11 different things basically, Mark, and put it. And I often, when I did this whiskey with my blender doing some tasting notes, we often call it a pinball effect. And there's so many complex flavors that are coming out of this, and I think the expression will be for itself. And those people like a multitude of flavors, this whiskey would be certainly for them.
As we noted, there are likely to be some minor changes between now and the time those whiskeys are released this fall, so I'll hold off on doing my tasting notes until they're released. The exact release date and prices have not yet been determined, but they're expected to be in line with the 2017 series. Last year's J.P. Weiser's 35 sold in most Canadian provinces for about $165 Canadian a bottle. Other big winners in the Canadian Whisky Awards, 40 Creek Heritage won the Award of Excellence for New Whisky of the Year, while Gibson's Finest Bold won the Award of Excellence for Best Line Extension, and Lowen McKinnon Barley and Rye Lightly Peated Whiskey from British Columbia's Center City Distilling took the Award of Excellence for Innovation. More on that one in just a few minutes. This was the first time two brewers from Yukon Brewing in Whitehorse, Yukon, entered the Canadian Whisky Awards. Bob Baxter and Alan Hansen not only took home the hat trick with gold, silver, and bronze medals, but they won Micro Distillery of the Year honors.
Bob, let me start with you. First of all, your thoughts on winning Micro Distillery of the Year a year after coming onto the market with your whiskeys.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, isn't it? I guess it just speaks to if you put the time in. We're so fortunate that we have a brewery, so we didn't have to rush anything to market. And when you're making wood-aged products, we thought when we started, we can wait 3 years, that's all good, not a problem. But when we taste it, we went, this is going the right way, but it's not ready. What's one more year? And then another and another and another till it finally came out. It was nice to have the luxury of waiting.
Alan, what prompted you guys to get into whiskey in the first place after running a successful brewery in Whitehorse?
I would say whiskey came about as a bit of a passion for us in terms of enjoying whiskey, and the fact that obviously we had everything in the plant other than a still to make whiskey. So the idea of extending our beer production into making whiskey was fairly natural, really, to think about it. So
now I can say this because I've actually been to Whitehorse. It is way the hell off the beaten path. What prompted you guys to start making beer in Whitehorse to begin with, and then build a distillery knowing that it's in the middle of the Yukon Territory, about 500 miles from any place, and without a ready-made market for your spirits? And Bob, I'll let you start with this.
Yeah, I think there's probably a little bit of madness going on in there. It's home, and it's where we wanted to do what we do. And making beer first and making spirits later was just following a love, as Al says, of things that we enjoy drinking. So we thought, well, what the heck, if we enjoy drinking it, maybe others will too. But it is a challenge being so far away and in such a small market. We have to rely on exports to be able to survive. And something we learned early on is you're only the home team at home. So it's a lot harder than we thought. And maybe had we known, we wouldn't have started.
But exports, you're talking about exports to other provinces, right?
Exports to other provinces, yeah. Right now our whiskey is in BC and Alberta and soon to be in Quebec. Again, it's easy to talk about selling to markets that you're not in. It's a hell of a challenge to do it.
How hard is it to get the grain in there to begin with in the middle of the winter?
It's not a problem. We bring the grain in 25 kilo bags. To keep it fresh, we're bringing it in constantly throughout the year, whether it be summer or winter. And it really does speak to something that's a little different about what we do. We make whiskey like a brewer makes whiskey, hence the name. We use all kinds of malted grains other than just pale barley, different roasted barleys and Munich malts and on and on. So we just take the grain that we're bringing in anyways, and we did that because we didn't know better.
Let me play off of that because you've introduced a couple of different lines, the classic line, the peated line. Alan, tell me about the differences in these two.
We have 4 umbrellas that we try to slot everything into, and it's mostly just because we worked on our ability to be diverse in what we produce, and we didn't want to limit ourselves in that way. So mostly we try to make products that when we slot them in an area, it gives the consumer an idea what it is or what the flavor profile might be when they taste it. But every batch that we bring out is going to be different. Every release is going to be distinctly different. So the classic line is meant to be something along the line that you would taste in a classic Highland or Lowland Scotch whiskey. The peated line obviously would be a peated malt. We have our barrel finishes where we're going to start playing with some different barrel finishes, and our innovative line gives us free reign in terms of all the different aspects we can do within brewing in terms of sour mashes or different fermentation techniques and things like that. So
now you handle all the blending for 2 brewers, but you don't have any training in blending, do you?
No. Not formal training, no. Just lots of tasting, and the palate is where it comes in. And probably as formal as my training is being a wine lover. So I've learned over the years that wine, I know what to taste for, to taste what I like, and I do the same thing when I'm blending whiskey. Is I taste for a profile within a whiskey that covers everything that I like. So.
How did you develop your palate besides tasting wine?
I think that was about it. Really, is it's just being honest with what you're tasting, not trying to be fancy with anything. Just know what it is that you like, and try to be able to sort that out within your palate. Be able to taste from front to back, and get a complete picture, as opposed to just seeing it all as one mass. It's there's distinct areas within the palate that you're looking for different things.
Bob, tell me about the challenges of distilling in Arctic weather, because we're doing this interview on January 18th, and I haven't looked at the weather forecast today, but I'm betting that the high today in Whitehorse was probably nowhere near 0.
No, it probably was nowhere near 0. Actually, Elle does the distilling as well as the blending, so I really don't have a lot to do with that. But I do think that something that we enjoy in the Yukon, if you want to call it enjoy, is extremely dry winters. So the variations we see in humidity that the barrels are exposed to, I think plays a large role in the way that the barrel aging occurs. Certainly, if you're in Kentucky, you're going to see huge temperature variations. Our barrels are all stored indoors, where the summer and winter variations are there, but not huge. But the humidity variations are enormous. So that's probably where a lot of the activity is coming from.
What temperature do you try to keep the warehouses at in the middle of the winter up there?
Our warehouse is same as our production facility, so it's workable temperatures, but probably median range is around 15 degrees. So. But it'll vary between 12 and 25 probably in terms of the variations around the year. So.
And we are talking Celsius here, gang, so don't think they're working in 15 degrees Fahrenheit. This translates out to, if I'm correct, about 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, in that sort of ballpark, right?
That would be correct, yep.
What is the overall goal for you guys? Is this Canadian domination? Is it to get outside of Canada? Where do you guys want to take this? And Bob, I'll let you handle that one.
Probably no domination whatsoever. I think that's a word that we probably never let slip into our conversations. Really, Mark, what this is, beer pays the bills. We're very happy. We've got a great market share and great customer base, but you can only do the same thing for so long before you need to challenge yourself. Quite frankly, we talk about our stock of barrels in the back as being our retirement program, either by virtue of selling it, or if nobody wants it, we'll drink it. Either way, it's a retirement program. So really, we don't have any great aspirations. We're having fun doing it. Getting third-party verification like we did tonight is a great pat on the back, and it's just fun.
So which is more fun, making whiskey or making beer?
I'd say they go hand in hand. You have to make beer before you make whiskey, so it's all part of the process. I would say at this stage in the game, whiskey is definitely more fun because it's new in the game and we're still learning a whole lot about it. So it's an amazing field scientifically, which is the way I look at it, and it's just amazing what happens year to year and how much we learn year to year. So.
Bob Baxter and Alan Hansen have released 7 single malts so far and premiered their 8th release this weekend in Victoria. It'll be on the market in the next few weeks. One final note on the awards. Lifetime Achievement Honors were presented to longtime Black Velvet blender Vicki Miller, Alberta Distillers General Manager Rick Murphy, and Jim Stansky of Hiram Walker & Sons. All 3 are retiring after many years of contributions to the Canadian whiskey industry. We add our congratulations and thanks. That's this week's WhiskyCast In Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin. Let me share a comment with you that someone told me at the end of the consumer tasting here in Victoria Saturday night while we were standing next to the Lagavulin table. He'd been tasting all sorts of whiskeys throughout the evening, but told me at the end of the night he just had to come back home to Lagavulin to put it all in perspective. I couldn't have said it any better myself. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. After the Canadian Whisky Awards were announced the other night, I took a look at my scores to see just what I'd been tasting and how I ranked them. One of the highest scores I gave out in this blind tasting was for the Lowen McKinnon Barley and Rye Lightly Peated Whiskey. It's bottled at 43% ABV, and it's a blend of malted rye whiskey matured in ex-bourbon barrels with lightly peated malted barley whiskey that was matured in Oloroso sherry casks. The nose is malty with lemon zest and a subtle spiciness, while the taste is nice and aggressive with a subtle peatiness, good spices, cooked fruits, and just a touch of clove, leading to a long and gently fading finish. I'm scoring the Lowen McKinnon Barley and Rye Lightly Peated Whiskey a 93. Now, we've been a little hard on British Columbia's provincial liquor system this week, but let's give them credit for this one. The province teamed up with Ben Riach a while back to produce an exclusive 18-year-old single cask bottling from 1998 that was finished in a tawny port pipe. It's bottled at 54.2% ABV, and the nose has notes of red grapes, fresh berries, a hint of orange blossom honey, and muted spices. The taste is spicy with clove, black pepper, and touches of ginger and molasses cookies. I'm scoring the Ben Riach 1998 tawny port pipe finish a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, makers of Whiskey Advocate's 2017 Whiskey of the Year, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. This 12-year-old barrel-proof bourbon was pitted blind against competition from around the globe and was consistently ranked number 1 by the magazine's testers. Meet the whole Elijah Craig family at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Next up, the Rock Oyster 18-year-old Islands blended malt from Douglas Lang & Company's remarkable regional malts range. It's bottled at 46.8% ABV and uses malts from Erin, Highland Park, Jura, and Lafroig. The nose has notes of sea salt, lemon zest, butterscotch, toasted oak, and just a kiss of smoke. The taste has a gentle smokiness with lemon pepper, sea salt, and smoked salmon, while the finish is nice and long with a citrusy tartness and a hint of brine. I'm scoring the Rock Oyster 18-year-old a 92. And finally, during a private tasting with some friends the other evening, I had the chance to try what may well be the rarest Bruichladdich Octomore of all. The Octomore OBA Concept 0.1 was released last spring after head distiller Adam Hannett poured some of it for his first master class during the 2016 Isla Festival. The OBA stands for Octomore Black Art, and Adam's not telling anyone just what he did with this one either. It's bottled at 59.7% ABV, and the nose has notes of campfire smoke with a hint of phenols, caramel apples, muted spices, black tea, and honey. The taste is spicy and smoky, complex without being overpowering, with notes of barbecued beef, a touch of toffee, cocoa beans, licorice, and charred oak. The finish is long, gently fading, and well, wow. All I can say is they made 3,500 ml bottles of it. They're all sold out now, but if you get the chance to taste it, go for it. I'm scoring the Bruichladdich Octomore OBA Concept 0.1 a 94. I'll be adding these tasting notes to the searchable list of nearly 2,100 different whiskeys at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD video episodes, the latest whiskey news, events, cocktail recipes, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes. Thanks to all of you who have taken the time to post ratings and reviews for WhiskyCast over the last few weeks on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast sites. If you haven't posted your review yet, please take a minute this week to do it. Reviews and ratings are figured into the search results that help other whiskey lovers discover WhiskyCast when they're looking for podcasts. Of course, you can always find me during the week on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique. But a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you most weeks from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. But this time around, I'm at the Hotel Grand Pacific in the even more charming city of Victoria, British Columbia. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.